thing with them, no problem at all. They're called the migraines. Jessica, thank you very much indeed. There'll be more news, of course, throughout the evening here on France 24. Do stay with us, of course, for all of that. It's time now for the France 24 debate. France has decided to extend the closure of its embassy in Yemen. The US and the UK have gone one further. They've evacuated diplomatic staff from Sana'a. This in the face of a potential attack. The terror threat identified by Washington was most likely intercepted using controversial techniques such as those exposed by Edward Snowden, the whistleblower in temporary asylum, of course, in Moscow. How else could you intercept a conversation involving al-Qaeda's leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri? But how great and how present is this terror threat, and how much has it begun to shape our lives and our response to events, both on a local and a world scale? We're here to discuss these wide-ranging issues are here in the studio, Ellen Wassilina, chairman of the experts group and president of the Observatory of the Black, Gulf and Mediterranean Seas. Ellen, thank you for joining us. Thank you. On the other side of our studio, Didier Chaudet, fellow and researcher at IPSI, which is the European Institute for Perspective and Security. The interesting thing about Didier is that he's just landed back in this country. Where have you been, sir?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, there you go. So a man with the up-to-date information about the situation there. DDS specialist on Afghanistan, Pakistan and Al-Qaeda. Joining us by satellite from London is Olivier Guitta, who's Director of Research at the Henry Jackson Society, a British group promoting the global rule of law and human rights. Thank you, sir, for joining us. We'll be getting you talking in a moment. And by Skype from Marseille, we're joined by Miriam Benraid, who is a research fellow on the Middle East at CERI, which, of course, is a Paris-based international think tank. And by Skype from Hartford, Connecticut, Scott Bates, president of the Center for National Policy. Scott is a specialist on Homeland Security and helped in the 9/11 Commission report. Now, you too, the viewers at home, can join this debate either via our Facebook page or via Twitter using the hashtag F24debate. That's hashtag F24debate. Your tweets on screen as soon as we have them processed. First, though, our reporter Mary Colombel gives us the latest on the embassies that have closed their doors, fearing attack.
Closed embassies are now a warning for all US citizens to leave Yemen. The reason for the alert, a conversation involving al-Qaeda's leader Ayman al-Zawahiri with the leader of the Yemen branch. The United States wished to avoid a repeat of the Benghazi attack in which Ambassador Chris Stevens was killed in Libya in September 2012. American intelligence officials have described the contents of the conversation as one of the most serious plots against American and Western interests since the 9/11 attacks. The United States PRISM surveillance network is believed to be the way this threat was detected. Edward Snowden exposed the way PRISM looked at normal people's personal business. Is this the price we have to pay to stop terror conspiracies? While Snowden is in temporary asylum in Moscow, the intelligence services continue to shadow plot al-Qaeda's next steps, from Afghanistan to Pakistan to Mali to Yemen.
Question, of course, is where does it go next? Where will the next hotspot be? Let's bring in our guests in the studio first before getting our guests joining us from afar into this debate. Ellen, I'll start with you. Clearly, we're seeing, you know, Afghanistan, Pakistan, North Africa, and now Yemen. More and more places becoming hotspots, hotbeds for al-Qaeda.
Sure, Mark. It's interesting to see, too, how the U.S. and its position has evolved, too, over the years, and its response to the first attacks. I think they went back in 1998, if memory serves it. I would like to talk about, too, today is how the U.S. security interests then have evolved in the policy there, too, meaning, too, that they have invested enormous amounts of financial means and manpower into fighting these menaces. And I'd just like to, if I may, remind our viewers about what the U.S. National interests are and how we'll see how the U.S. then comes together with its allies to advance these interests, which, for example, would be the first one is to protect U.S. allies and partners from state adversaries, and to promote U.S. influence in key regions, dissuade military competition in arms races, protect Americans, and this is where we are today, right, from terrorist attacks, restrict the flow of illegal trade and proliferations of dangerous materials, so that goes to transporting bombs and explosives and the like, and ensure the flow of commerce. We can't, we don't talk about that enough, how the liberty and the ease of doing commerce and transporting goods. and respond, of course, to humanitarian emergencies and regional conflicts. So this comes all together, if you will, Mark, in saying that these embassies that were closed in these particular regions are, of course, very sensitive investments, if you will, for the United States. So their national security interests projecting, again, the United States in the region. It's only natural that they would want to protect them.
Indeed, Didier, would you say it was the right thing to do to close these embassies? We don't know the exact nature of the threat, but clearly it must have been very much a top-line threat.
It must have been a very important threat. The question one can always ask oneself when you hear such news is, are these embassies not protected enough on an everyday basis? And the fact of the matter is the same thing with our airports. Sadly enough, we think that we are protecting ourselves, but we have been reacting to threats. We have not been able to controlling and stopping the threat. So right now we close the embassies, and it's seen as the best move to do, indeed, to protect American lives linked to these embassies. Now, at the same time, it is sending a message of weaknesses from a jihadist point of view. And there is a need to, of course, protect these American lives, but to go further, to understand that the Al-Qaeda threat is not gone, and that it is not moving from one place to another. We cannot forget about Afghanistan and Pakistan, for example, because we are moving to Yemen. We need to keep several targets all over the world at once to target the terrorists and at the same time to follow the political issues that are going on there. Because Al-Qaeda becomes strong in one country because there is a failing of a rule of law.
That's right.
It's one of these things about this whole issue about the terror threat. It's hard to predict where this is going to happen next. In 1998, as you alluded to, Alan, no one saw what was going to happen in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. No. And then nobody, again, foresaw 9/11. Nobody foresaw what happened in London recently with Lee Rigby, the soldier, being killed. It seems to just jump up in random places, but inspired by one thing. Let's bring in some of our guests from afar. Miriam Benrad, who is an expert on the Middle East. In terms of the instability there, Miriam, that we're seeing at the moment in Syria, and of course you could say beyond, would you say there is a distinct threat there of Al-Qaeda creating an even greater stronghold?
Well, I think it's important to recall that Al-Qaeda has always remained a threat, regionally speaking. And the interesting point is that since the death of bin Laden, we've witnessed through the strategy that has characterized Zawahiri in particular, a shift back of Al-Qaeda to its old priorities, which is the first priority is the struggle against the regimes in place, with a very interesting new priority since the organization is now targeting the Muslim Brothers, who are considered as the new enemies since having taken part in the democratic process, which I would like to recall is seen by the jihadists as a Western importation and so an infidel process. The second very interesting issue, I think, is that Al-Qaeda, in terms of being back to its old priorities, has taken the jihad back to the region and no longer focuses on exporting jihad to Western territories such as Europe and the US. And of course, Syria and Iraq, the Syrian-Iraqi front is today the priority, with a lot of volunteers, jihadists going and fighting, waging jihad against the al-Assad regime. The third dimension, which is very important, is that in terms of targets, Al-Qaeda is still targeting Westerners and Israel, of course, but the current priority is the Shiite axis, or what is seen as being the alliance between the al-Assad regime, Iran, and other Shiite communities in the region. But overall, I think that it's very interesting to highlight to what extent Zawahiri has taken back a very pragmatic approach with through targeting Western presence in the region and the different targets that I've just mentioned, and not giving up on bin Laden's strategy, which was a worldly strategy, but having adopted this much more gradual approach, which is actually characteristic of the traditional strategy of Al-Qaeda since it was created.
Miriam, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Scott Bates, who is awaiting us in Connecticut, president of the Center for National Policy. Scott, we heard Ellen here in the studio talking about America's interests and America's approach. I mean, clearly since 9/11, life and the outlook there has changed and changed utterly, has it not?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you look in the region, it's a region in great turmoil, but for the first time in decades, and you could say centuries, the political future of the Arab world is in the hands of the Arabs themselves. I think this is a long-term, a great development, but in the short term, we're going to see a lot of instability, which could lead to al-Qaeda taking opportunistic advantage of chaotic situations, and we'll have to be aware of that. Here in the United States, though, I have to say I think that this broad warning is maybe not the best way to go long term, because for the American people, they're not plugged into what's going on in the Middle East all the time, but they sure did hear that al-Qaeda is kind of back on the radar screen. And I think that we as a nation in the United States need to find a very sustainable counterterrorism approach here, where we have diplomats overseas. I've served 25 times. I've gone out to the Middle East on different missions for development organizations and such, always knowing that I was a potential target. I'm not saying we can't take it lightly, but I am saying that we need broad engagement with the Middle East and with the Arab people and Muslim people all over the world, for that matter. The engagement that comes from education and exchange and business to change attitudes over time. It's hard to do it with this kind of reaction that we've done. So the threat is real. There's no doubt about that. But the U.S. has to find a way to configure ourselves so that we don't have to lock down whenever Zawahiri or some other guy is trying to make a name, get back in the news out of Pakistan.
Scott, thank you very much. Do bear with us. Let's bring you the first tweet that's coming to us here at the France 24 debate. It says, if the NSA is so damn good at tracking terrorist threats, why can't they uncover any details about the threat which led to embassy closures? Ellen, in terms of what they're doing, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't, because obviously the Edward Snowden affair was all about the fact that the NSA was prying into people's lives and listening to conversations.
Sure, but isn't this, again, a question of timing, that we see that after and following on the heels of this affair, that we realize it is probably very useful to have that information, right? And how sophisticated and how investments have been made in the United States. 1998 to 2003, where you saw the U.S. budget in new technologies, nanotechnologies, information technologies, and other type of technology, specific technologies were tripled from $33 million to $98 million, whereas in Europe, and I made this point before, went from 9 to 15 billion. So that means that there was less spending, and the Americans have really developed the technologies that certainly help us get hopefully an advanced step in.
That sounds like time to go to London. Let's bring in Olivier Yaguita from the Henry Jackson Society. Olivier, with this lack of intelligence, I'm thinking back to the dreadful killing of Lee Rigby on the streets of the borough of Woolwich in London. Intelligence may be lacking, certainly lacking, in not seeing what was happening and not tracking down his killers before they acted.
Right. I mean, human intelligence is really lacking at this point, and you know, the fact that, for instance, in Yemen they had to call the population and put posters with the 25 most wanted is something that gets back a little bit to the Stone Age of getting information. It is also a point where you see that the authorities in Yemen are clueless at this point, and they're just trying to scramble and get as quickly as possible their hands on those 25 that most probably came into the country within the past few weeks, and that was one of the warnings that the Yemeni president gave to President Obama last week, that really triggered as well that closure of embassies. At this point, what the US can do is still try to target Al-Qaeda operatives through the air by drone attacks. I mean, they've picked up in the past few days 4 drone attacks in 10 days. But other than that, they would need to get clear cooperation from the Yemeni authorities, and as much as possible giving them power, money in order to reclaim their country, which is not the case at the moment.
You mentioned about the Yemeni authorities being clueless, Olivier. Just coming back to the killing of Lee Rigby, one could, and many people did, level that same accusation against British intelligence too.
You have a point. I mean, as much as possible, it is true that human intelligence is not at the level it should be. And when you had also the case of Mohamed Merah in Toulouse in France, also that was on the radar and that was missed. It all comes down to means, financial means, and getting more people to track down those people, because there's no way, even if you have a good intelligence service, that you're going to be able to track down everyone and put a policeman behind every man that is suspected of doing something bad quickly. The issue at this point is really for the government to get as much as possible human intelligence, infiltrate the network, be on the forums and the websites which they are, and try as much as possible to get their intelligence right. But it's very difficult when somebody is really flying low and not telling anyone what he intends to do. And at this point, in the two cases in France and England, I agree with you. It was a case of not being able to follow up for whatever reason, but there was a mishap there.
Olivier, you said I had a good point. I'll add to that that, yes, it might have been a good point, but it's very easy to be clever in hindsight. And we all know that that's not really clever at all, because we can all see what's happening, can't we? Let's take another look at the tweets coming in. Mr. Obama, if the terrorist threat is so specific, why are you closing down embassies everywhere? We'll try to get into that question in the second part of our debate. Do stay with us. We're taking a very short break, some news, and then more discussion. You're watching France 24.